Hi everyone, I'm here with Steve Exton today. He's in charge of business development for Europe for Firstsource, and Firstsource are in the BPO, outsourcing and collection space. So Steve, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, you're more than welcome.
And I suppose what we want to start off is just what are some of the things you're seeing, especially in terms of digital transformation in the market? And I know you guys have done a lot in terms of like digital transformation, but what are you seeing in terms of what clients requesting? What are some of the themes that people are looking at, particularly this year?
Yeah, sure. First of all, there's a lot of variances between different organisations and different sectors. They're all at different stages of their digital collections journey. You have some early adopters that are quite advanced, and then you've got other companies that are actually seeing what's happening in the marketplace and seeing how things develop and are a little bit slower to actually implement the digital solution. So there's quite a variance. Between all of them. Everybody does some level of digital collections and have digital in their organization. But of course, as with most things in life, there's different levels to it.
Yeah. So have you seen that? Is that adoption been sort of changing? I just feel like we've been through this like wave of digital adoption, and almost like the attitude towards digital has almost changed in the customer base.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think COVID, without any shadow of a doubt, obviously was not a great time for the country or even the world. But that was definitely a catalyst for digital. Obviously, agents on the service provider side were in general working from home. Customers were obviously having to do the same. Telephony seemed to there was definitely a drop in telephony activity, and a lot of customers moved to more of a digital process. That coupled along with the fact that the younger generations, the Gen Zs and the millennials, are very much more orientated to doing stuff digitally and working off their phone. That's definitely been a step forward. But I wouldn't limit it to just the younger generations, because in all fairness, it's got a far wider reach. So all generations are using digital, but definitely the Gen Zs and the millennials, they've been using digital since they were young children, so they naturally navigate towards it.
It does feel like we've almost turned a corner to a certain extent in terms of that everyone's getting over the top of the hill in terms of putting these processes in place. But it still feels like there's quite a lot to do, though. I'm not sure what you see when you go out to clients in terms of like we're all talking a good game. Is it actually really generating change when you go and see prospects and clients in terms of what you're in the market?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. So there's definitely a lot of talk about it. And of course, with the latest hot topic of AI, even more talk about it. But there's definitely less action. And what I'm seeing is that most companies will obviously they'll do it in stages, which is fair enough because it reduces the risk and reduces the effect if you make any errors. But certainly the companies that are adopting it typically start slower. They maybe start on a smaller segment of work or on a particular part of their customer base, or maybe they don't actually go ahead with a full-blown solution. The other bit that they actually do is go for a managed service. There are providers out there that will actually offer to, for example, write the communications, write the strategies, and actually manage the end-to-end service or part of. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of the creditors actually will then opt for a managed service, because obviously the service provider has the expertise. Now that's starting to change. I'm seeing more and more companies now starting to request a SaaS service, a SaaS model, because they're now at the point where they're ready to actually adopt it themselves. And actually, so those are some of the changes that I'm seeing.
So is that almost like a little bit of, if I'm a creditor, I'm basically going to outsource it all in because I know that I can get the technology from the vendor plus the people and plus everything. And so it's like almost like that. Is that like an investment kind of decision that's kind of made? Like I can get it quickly, I can outsource it, but then once I've proven it as a fact, then I can bring it in house. I want to have my own people managing it. But I still want to use the technology. Is that the kind of the dynamics you're seeing? It's almost like a change curve to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think you've summed it up absolutely perfectly. So there's a lots of, as with most things, experience comes into play. So if you've got a service provider that's been providing digital collections for a while, there's lots of experiences and lots of learnings that can come from that. So a new entrant or somebody that's moving into the digital collections world isn't going to know what those nuances are. And what I'm talking about there is things like empathetic outreach. How do you increase engagement when you're communicating digitally? You're relying on the recipient to actually engage. So how do you increase the likelihood of that customer actually engaging with your communications. There is a number of things there that a new entrant isn't going to know. Another one could be contact strategies, frequency of contact, etc., and how you blend all the different contact methods together. So that can take a little while to learn. So in the early days, that's where what we're finding is a lot of creditors are just outsourcing on a managed service basis. But then, like you've said, after a period of time, they then bring that in-house and do a SaaS model.
Yeah, there's been a big debate, I'd say, over the last year, and we're going to talk a bit about large language models in a minute. But there's been a big debate around it. Do you always have to have an agent, particularly in the collections world? And I've heard this, different views from different folks, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like there was a battle. It's almost like you're going to be 100% digital, or we're going to be 100% using an agent. And it feels like we've changed to being a bit sort of like it's going to be messy and it's going to be a little bit in between. I mean, where do you stand on that? Because some of it almost felt like resistance to a certain extent to change and to digital, but there's also some truth behind it, particularly the vulnerability piece. What's your kind of view on it? Your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. It should be a digitally led strategy. If you're talking about the generic customer base, if you want to do outreach to a particular segment, maybe vulnerable customers, maybe you don't want to go with digitally led. But if you're talking about generic collections, for example, then typically the best way forward is a digitally led approach. However, and I've heard other speakers talk about this, agents are imperative. In fact, they're maybe even more important in the process now, because what digital will allow you to do is allow the customers with less complex cases or less complex scenarios, or allow customers that are very confident about self-serving. You're allowing those customers to self-serve. What that then means is that it allows your agents to actually focus on either the more complex cases or the customers that are less confident in self-serving. So agents actually play a more important part, because you're allowing customers to self-serve, if you like, the low-hanging fruit they can deal with themselves, but the agents are as required as ever. Yes, typically when you bring in a digital collections platform, yes, there is a reduction in cost to serve, which is through agent reduction, but it's not as big as what a lot of people think, because you always need those agents. And of course, with a good digital solution, sorry to just add on, with a good digital solution, what you should also have, this is something that a lot of people overlook, is at various steps along the way, there should be the opportunity, a good solution should give the customer the opportunity to call in to the contact center, okay, if at any point they want to. So there's that as well.
I know you do work in many different markets, including North America, Europe, etc. How do you find that different? How do you guys find it different between the different markets? So certainly in North America, my experience in North America, there was an imperative around cost. Yes, service, yes, but definitely around cost and looking at like cost to collect. In the UK, with some of the stuff that's been done with the regulation here, there was that other aspect in terms of good outcomes with consumer duty. How do you find that? Does that change the dynamics, particularly in terms of like how people adopt the product or what they're looking for in the product?
Definitely, there are some differences between the different geographies, but there's also a large crossover. I think it's the CFPB as a regulator in North America. That's heavily regulated as well. However, the regulation is different, but it's actually only subtly different. At the end of the day, it's there to make sure the customer gets a good or gets the right outcome. And so that's the same here. And of course, what will actually happen, part of having a good outcome for the customer is it needs to be a good journey as well. That's the first part. It needs to be a good journey, which then results in a good outcome. And depending, you can't approach this with a broad brushstroke, because not everybody's the same, but actually, and it's forever increasing, what digital allows is a better journey, because you can self-serve at a time and at a place of your choosing, whether that's a Sunday evening or a Saturday morning or a Wednesday night when a call center is closed. With a digital solution, it allows the customer to actually self-serve and resolve the issue, as it were.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're given a very good customer journey. Then you blend that with the fact that the customer can always call into the call center within their opening hours. So then now you've covered all the bases, and then it's just about getting the right outcome. And a good digital solution, as long as the development's been done, what actually happens is you embed the client's guidelines or their guardrails within the actual solution, so that you end up with ultimately the same outcome as if it was an agent dealing with the customer.
Yeah. How do you manage that sort of almost like from an omni-channel point of view? So if I'm making that contact at 11 o'clock at night, because that's the only time I got my day when I'm actually free, I might send an email, I might send a message, but then it might be so complex where I can't fully self-serve and I actually need to interact with someone. I mean, how do you, because that's in the weeds to a little bit. That's like the basis of operations, isn't it? You've got to still have actually serve that person the next day, so it has to be picked up. You have to make sure that actually person does get treated the next day, even if it's by an individual. Like, how do you manage that complexity? It's fairly seamless from a customer point of view, but from an operations or from a client point of view, it's very real. It presents very real problems, right? How do you best manage that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. First of all, the most traditional way is that you deliver a message to the customer
Mm,
that they need to speak to an agent. Call center operating hours are whatever they are, 8 till 6, and that they will be contacted tomorrow. Some slightly more advanced ways if you're part of a large organization with call centers, if you like, around the world, then you can have a follow the sun model. Yes, it might be 11 o'clock in the evening here, but of course, it's depending where you are in America, it's somewhere between 4 and 6 in the afternoon.
mm,
So you potentially could put that customer into a call center into America where they could speak to an agent. In that, using that example, and another one is AI. So depending on the complexity of the case, you've got chatbots, etc., that are actual conversational AI that's sitting behind the solution. The customer can actually converse anyway with the solution, and in many cases resolve the issue. But you can or will get to a point where there will be the odd occasion where maybe the issue is so complex or it does need an agent. What happens is the AI then elevates that to a live agent, at which point, of course, the
mm,
live agent wouldn't be available. And therefore, you then deliver a message back to the customer saying, we'll contact you tomorrow.
mm.
Our office hours are 8 till 6, and somebody
Yeah.
will call you between those times.
Do you think we're going to see like a reduction of opening hours as a result of some of the volume getting taken out? Typically, it always used to be like 8 till 9 p.m., which again prevents because no one works 8 till 9 p.m. That's a very long day, so you end up like getting shifts and we get onto those kind of things. Do you think it was change maybe the fundamentals around how we change like shift patterns? I suppose you still have to be open in the evening to be able to if you do need to talk to someone.
Yeah, I think such a great question. When we saw that change in COVID, where during COVID, obviously, most people then work from home. Office hours changed at that point slightly, but then when people started then going back into the office hours never really opened back up. Like you said, and I smiled when you said it. Back in the day, and I've been in the industry 24 years. Back in the day, typical was 8 till 8, Monday to Friday, and a Saturday
Mm,
morning. Very rarely, I think we all acknowledge that we very rarely see that now. It's typically what, 8 till 6,
yeah.
Monday to Friday, and maybe not even open on a Saturday. And that's partly because, of course, as I touched on earlier, the digital solution, COVID was a catalyst for it. So digital then stepped up. It was being utilized a lot more. And therefore, there's never been the need, or there's been less need to actually have longer opening hours.
Yeah. Do you think that leaves customer contact almost like on the table by not opening those later hours? Because if you work and you work 9 to 5, you don't have time until later on in the evening. So if there is a need to have that agent contact or that agent discussion, it's like you're doing it at work, or has the world changed completely where now we've all got mobile phones and you call on your break and those kind of things? Do you think there's still a need for that calling in the evening, or what's your kind of view?
Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky, actually. I think we're in this sort of transition period
Mm,
whereby I mentioned earlier about, and I categorized it by the sort of Gen Zs and millennials, and then I mentioned older generations. Everybody, well, yeah, all generations are using digital. It's more prevalent with Gen Zs and millennials, maybe. So we're in that transition period right now where there's still a reasonable percentage of the population that will
mm,
definitely want to just only deal by telephone. And yeah, I feel a little bit sorry for them because, of course, call centers are transitioning to more digital.
mm,
Okay. And there's still that element of customer that still wants to deal in the traditional way. Over time, of course, and every month, more and more customers want to deal digitally, but there are still customers that want to deal traditionally. So I think that's a difficult challenge that all call centers are struggling to deal with because, of course, the number of customers that actually want to deal traditionally are a lot less. So then how do you manage the shifts and the shift patterns, etc.? And you can't have the wide opening hours.
mm.
And then even if you do, then you're struggling to manage your abandon rate because you actually don't have that many agents on that shift. So it is definitely a tricky problem to manage at this
Yeah.
moment in time.
Yeah. And so you mentioned AI there in terms of large language models. They hit the scene last year. It feels like it's gone a little bit quieter actually this year, but although I think a lot of work's going on in the background. What's your kind of view on like where that can get used, particularly within the collections process?
Yeah, it can be used in various ways. I think a couple of areas that are very easily overlooked, and we're seeing a lot of activity in this area right now, or it seems to be growing, is actually in QA, quality assurance, and after
Mm,
call work. The minute, typically, what we've been dealing with is one call per agent per week, as an example. The QA is a sample
mm,
of what an agent does across the month. What AI enables organizations to do now is ramp that up to from being a sample of maybe 5 calls a month to 100%.
mm,
So you can build AI into QA scorecards, and it'll actually do the job for you. And therefore, you can actually see what agents are doing. You can get accurate scores on that. And then what you can do is you can actually use your QA team to actually invest more time monitoring the results of that and
mm,
actually then giving feedback and managing the agents.
mm,
Whereas at the minute, all you're getting is a representative sample. So definitely QA is an area for AI. And another one would be around after call work using speech to text AI. What you can actually do is you can actually, if you've got a wrap time, let's say it's 5 or 6 minutes to wrap a call and write up the agent notes, you can actually do that using AI in a fraction of the time, therefore reducing the overall average handle time, and that makes the call center more efficient.
Yeah, we talk a lot about digital transformation, but there's on like digital transformation in terms of the customer, but there's also digital transformation in terms of the employee experience as well, isn't there? So that what you just described there is digital transformation in terms of the employee experience. I mean, where else do you think you can get like use of data or use of technology really to give better customer experiences for employees as well? I mean, is there opportunity there? Do we talk enough about that?
We don't talk enough about it, and I think actually, as a slight side issue to that, what the actual agent's role is changing. So going back to something I mentioned earlier about the maybe the lesser complex cases and
Mm,
customers now self-serving, what that means is that the agents are now dealing with the more complex cases more often. Long gone are the days where you'd have an agent spending a lot of their time in the day maybe processing a payment, for
mm,
example, and spending 5 minutes taking somebody's card details and updating a payment and setting up a payment plan, because in a lot of cases the customer can do that themselves. So what that now means is that the agents are spending more time maybe dealing with a vulnerable customer or more complex cases.
mm,
And so for that reason, the actual agents role and the conversations they're having throughout the day, I would say, are more demanding
mm.
and more complex and require more training, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it just feel like it's changing. It's changing fairly fast. I mean, even I think
Mm,
the AI piece, it feels like we're just scratching the surface on it to a certain extent. There are a couple of cases where it's coming through in terms of like case notes and those kind of things, but it feels like there potentially could be more. The
yeah,
resistance really is really around transparency and making sure you can understand decisions, particularly in financial services. I would think. Do you see that change,
yeah.
but different attitudes by market as well?
And then just yes, we do. But just going back to that as well, in terms of AI, what you can also do is, and it ties in with the QA piece, it can also help you have more compliant calls and reduce AHT because you can actually link the AI into the CRM. And so therefore, what the AI can actually do is guide an agent through a call. So as a simple example, at the beginning of the call, if the agent doesn't do ID and V correctly, having an AI embedded in your system, it can actually flag that to the agent and say, before you move on, you need to go back and complete ID and V. So
Mm,
what you're also doing, not only can you use the AI to actually do the QA analysis and checks as well, you can actually use it at the front end and actually minimize the number of failures
mm.
by embedding AI into the CRM platform.
Yeah, so you get feedback loops as well, I
Yeah,
suppose.
absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of industries, Chris, yeah, you're absolutely right. It changes because, of course, the different industries have different challenges and they have different requirements within the collections. Whether you're talking energy, banking and finance, insurance, telecoms, they all have their own niche requirements. So yeah, absolutely, it changes. It changes from industry sector to sector.
Mm. I mean, wanted to ask a little bit about channels, right? And there's been
Mm.
an explosion of channels that have come across. It used to be back in the days where we would send a letter, we would try and call on the telephone, and then maybe if you're really advanced, you'd have an SMS campaign as well, right? But now we've got two-way SMS, we've got different types of messaging services. You've got WhatsApp, you've got Messenger, you've got different ones, different markets. You've got RCS is out there, and Apple Chat, and there's app chat that's coming through. Like, how do you manage and decide which channels are the best ones to use? And it's not just about managing also what you've got, but then also how do you stay ahead of it as well?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult for the service provider. That's one of the challenges that they have. And
Mm,
again, you've summed it up perfectly. So it's important to have a seamless process as well when the customer wants to change channel, maybe mid-contact. So you
mm,
need to be able to do that. Machine learning plays a part in this, because what you should be doing, or what you should be looking to do, is actually measure, not just which templates, which time of day, which day of week obtains the best results. You should also be looking at the channel. So again, a good digital solution will actually identify that and actually systemically start communicating with the customer on the channel of their choice, the one that the customer maybe contacts back on. Then obviously that a good solution should just naturally adapt to that and
mm,
start communicating with that customer, not just the time of day and the day of the week, but the channel that the customer
mm.
selects. So that's how it should work. Having said that, you're right. There's so many different channels out there. It can be quite difficult to embed all of those channels within one digital solution.
Are there any that you think is like at the moment are stronger than others? We used to be very sort of telephony based, particularly outbound telephony based back in the days back in the days of the dialer. But are there any that have come through? Is it SMS? Is it feels like WhatsApp's an upcoming channel, particularly in Europe? Are there any that you think are particularly strong?
Yeah, believe it or not, we're talking about advances in technology, et cetera, and how to move forward. But SMS is, again, it comes down to each individual customer,
Mm,
obviously. But generally speaking, SMS is still a very strong channel in terms of open rates, click-through rates, and actually getting the customer to engage, and also speed of engagement. As I'm sure probably most of us would acknowledge, you might look at your emails, your personal emails, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 times in a day, but as soon as you get a text message, typically within 10 minutes, you've looked at it. So you tend to find that the response rates are very much quicker with SMS. And
no.
obviously, the steps before that, in terms of open and click through, are obviously strong as well.
And I suppose that's incumbent on the service providers to also respond in the same kind of speed as well. So if you can't and you aren't able to do that, then I suppose that's something that kind of customers expect. I would imagine.
Yeah, most definitely. And again, that's where conversational AI comes in, because you're then going back to average speed of answer in telephony terms. You're going back to average speed of answer, and linked in with abandon rates. Conversational AI can remove any of those worries about adhering, because if a customer responds, then you've got conversational AI in place, then you can
Mm,
respond straight away, whether you've got an agent available or not.
mm,
Going back to something I mentioned earlier, I suppose the only bit that you need to the only bit there you need to focus on is that if you've written your scripts well, occasionally there's going to be maybe a complex case that the conversational AI can't deal with, and then it has to escalate it to an agent.
mm.
And it's at that point that it's important that you've got an agent available to respond in a reasonably timely manner, because then obviously the AI, your average speed of answer can come into play.
Yeah, you go from like computer speed to human speed, and but I mean, I suppose it doesn't eliminate the fact that you need to have workforce planning and shift management and all those kind of things and capacity management just to make sure that you can, when it does get to a human, I suppose you can get to someone. I suppose if you've got
Yes.
smaller teams, then that becomes actually more complex in some ways.
It does, absolutely. I was just thinking
Yeah,
exactly the same. It goes back to
yeah,
the point we were talking about earlier, about shift patterns going into the evening, and all of a sudden you've
yeah.
got a smaller team, and then when a call comes in, do you have an agent available? And therefore it becomes more difficult to manage abandon rates. So yeah, you have to be very conscious of that. So it's important to have a good WFN team to be able to set the shift patterns correctly and have the right number of agents available.
And I suppose we talked a lot about sort of digital transformation, but it's also changed our lives as well, right? In terms of business world, we're chatting over Teams in this case. But like, how's that changing your life in terms of how you interact with clients as well. And has that changed fundamentally from where it was before? And we used to see each other at conferences and those kind of things. Are you seeing that kind of those kind of dynamics change? And are clients expecting a different kind of change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, although the world in collections is very much moving towards digital, typically on a day-to-day basis, from my perspective in my world, for me, it's more about the telephone and speaking to clients and prospects and having meaningful conversations. Social media and digital email, SMS is vital, but what that actually does is that's about increasing the familiarity with yourself and your brand. But at the end of the day, it's about having meaningful conversations with clients and prospects about how you can help them. In a strange way, as much as I promote digital collections on a day-to-day basis, most of my work's done by telephone.
It's interesting to almost as much as we're way more social with social media. People are much more out there. There's much more engagement, those kind of things. At the end of the day, you still need to have that relationship, and at some point it tips over into almost like that one-to-one relationship. I just wonder if that reflects back on consumers as well, which is like we can have all these self-serve digital processes, but then at some point it needs to tip over into we actually want to have that sort of like personal conversation, and it's around judging where you want to draw that line to a certain extent.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And I said earlier about having digitally led collections. It's also still very important to do outbound dialing,
Mm,
but what it should be targeted outbound
mm,
dialing based on your insights that you receive within the business. You should be selective about the customers that you actually put into the dialer file, and then you reach out to them and you actually have a
mm,
conversation with them. And those customers respect that. If you get it right, and if you've got your analytics right, those customers actually respect that. And I'm not sure if we've got analytics around it, but you'd like to think that you get a better propensity to pay off the back of it. But certainly it's a better customer journey as well. Going back to the FCA piece, if you get that right and you identify which customers are better to outbound dial and go into the dialer file, then that's actually a better customer journey.
I suppose part of it, though, if I'm just going back to almost like a marketing point of view, is like how much can you almost pre-prepare with your digital communications the the contact with the customer, so it feels less threatening, it feels less that it's a much warmer kind of contact, and so they're not as nervous necessarily. So when you do phone them, then maybe it's an easier conversation and better engagement than it would be if you just called them cold. I just wonder if do we think around that kind of mix between almost here's the preparation for us having that call later on. Hopefully it's self-serve, but but if it's not, then it becomes a warmer kind of engagement.
Yeah, most definitely. And again, it's really important in terms of how the communication is written. So if you don't have an email address for somebody, then obviously you can't email them. You might send them a couple of SMSs, but again, what your insights are telling you is that if the customer's not opening your messages and not clicking through to the self-serve portal,
Mm,
then within the strategy, there needs to be a point where you go, okay, let's try an outbound dial. And to your point, the messages that you're sending the customer in the first instance, that's already starting to build up a relationship. You can see through the digital solution whether a customer's actually opened those communications. And as long as you get the message right, and as long as it's written in the right way, and I think I used the word empathy a bit earlier, so long as you're actually engaging in the right way and delivering the right message, then the customer is definitely going to be more open when you actually
mm,
make an outbound call. I guess the problem with that, and it's again one of the reasons why digital taking a huge step forward in recent years, is that most people that get a phone call on most of us have smartphones. So I think the stat is 94% of inbound calls that have got a number that's not known by the
mm,
recipient get rejected. Somebody won't answer their phone.
mm,
So you still have that hurdle to overcome. So even if your communications are delivering the right message and building up a good relationship with the customer,
mm,
when you do then make that outbound phone call, you've still got to overcome
mm.
the hurdle of, will the customer answer?
Yeah, yeah. And
Because it's an unknown number.
it feels like there's almost like an extra layer that's like being developed in terms of how do you think of it almost like as this end-to-end conversation in terms of we're going to call you, are you ready to take a call, almost like just think about what we do personally, and almost can we build that into our almost like business processes as well, which is it feels like that's where you're starting to think a bit about contact strategy, which is much more complex than we're going to call you when you're most likely to pick up the phone sort of thing. It's much more nuanced, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And dare I say, we might have mentioned it a little bit earlier. There is actually a place in the digital or digitally led collections process to send a letter.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
as ironic as that might sound, but if you're not, if again, it's the same as when you actually decide to do some outbound targeted dialing. There comes a
mm,
point whereby, depending on the information you hold and the contact points you've got with a customer, you might get to a point in a digital collection strategy where you go, okay, next best step, we actually need to send this customer a letter in the post.
yeah. I
Uh,
suppose all these things come around, don't they?
yeah, yeah.
Where do you think we go for the next sort of like 2, 3, 4, 5 years? What do you think's next on the horizon? Just given where we've come from, I mean, come so far in the last 5 years, where do we go next?
Yeah, I actually think it's embedding the solutions that we've been talking about, because we touched on the fact that there's been a lot of talk about it. And yes, some people are absolutely fully adopted digital, but there's still a lot of companies, organizations that don't have a fully embedded digital solution. And
Mm,
so I think it's really just about taking stock of where we are, really embedding machine learning and AI as an example within the solution, really understanding that better,
mm,
because those both of those areas are huge steps forward,
mm,
and they're both still in their infancy. And
yeah,
so I think it's about really understanding the gains that we can get in both of those areas, and consolidating
yeah.
is probably where I see it for the next few years. It's consolidating what we've got and refining what we've got and get it working really perfectly.
Yeah, it does feel like we go through these periods of having lots of great ideas, but
Yeah.
then you've actually got to turn the ideas into reality, and like we work quietly in the background, actually getting it done. But then it's almost then it blossoms into this almost like new world of think about the adoption of the internet as an example is my favorite one. There's some great ideas, but then it took a few years. But now we have Amazon, we have all the online servicing, and it's all just available. And we just take it for granted, really. So it's a fascinating journey, anyway. Steve, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate you making the time and explaining a little bit, at least what you guys are up to.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem at all, Chris. Appreciate your time.